The days of I just need someone to build my idea are over. Today, non-technical founders can get their vision to life without the help of a developer. That doesn't necessarily mean you never need a technical co-founder, but it means that they're not a roadblock for your vision. I'm going to show you can turn an idea into a functional prototype in half an hour. All right. So what we're going to start with is, or GPT, doesn't matter really. And we're going to create a PRD, which is essentially a requirements document, which outlines what the product needs to do. We're also going to create a thought process around the whole thing. And I just kind of want to show, without saying that this is a functional product, I think this is where people go wrong. And when they say, nobody ever is going to need any other developer anymore. But I think what this does do for you is to bring your idea to life, to communicate it to a potential technical co-founder, to an investor, to, someone that wants to help you create this. And it also needs you to think about what you're actually trying to achieve and break it down in a way that is simple and achievable. Because I think a lot of times idea people are very much up in the clouds, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But we need to mirror that with kind of, realism in a sense. And so we need to be pragmatic, right? Like we need to be in the middle between being idealistic and being realistic. So yeah, let's do that. If you've never worked with a PRD or any type of thing, I think what's super easy to do is just to say, hey, I want to build a product. We're going to do this live and want to start with a PRD. Help me create one by asking all the necessary questions. So for myself, I have a tool that does this that I've created myself because I do it all the time. And you can do that, but to keep it easy and to keep it reproducible, I want to do it all in Claude and V0, which is going to do the prototyping. So bear with me. We'll get through this together. And then you can step-by-step replicate it without having to have my tools or having to have stuff you don't have access to, because these are available tools. All right, so what we have here: product overview, market analysis, requirements, features, technical requirements, user experience, timeline, success, constraints. So this is a lot. I don't think we need to start with all this, but it does make sense if you are planning to create a business around this, to think through all of this. Maybe even to help Claude do a lean canvas, but I think that's a topic for another video. There's all these other things you can do, but let's assume you've already done a bit of research and you kind of, just need someone to build it, which is usually how the narrative goes. But yeah, all right. So what problem are we solving? Target users. Let's stick to the product overview and maybe the user requirements. And so these three, I think, are very important. We can ignore the analysis for now. We can ignore the requirements because the tooling will give us kind of constraints. With V0, we'll probably shit out a next step or something. So that kind of narrows it down already. But yeah, don't ignore these things. Just for the sake of this exercise, we're going to ignore them. So I didn't actually think about a product that we can build together. So let's just use Claude again to help us come up with one. I haven't thought of any product to build, but I want to show it off in a YouTube video. Very meta. That should not take longer than 20 minutes. So maybe we can essentially synthesize or generate the idea here as well. Let's see. Target audience are technical users. Give me some ideas. So instead of answering all these questions, we can be like, yeah, I see that you want all this information, and obviously it's going to give you a better result. But for the sake of being, we can essentially, or for the sake of this, we can ignore them and kind of steer it in a certain direction. Let's see what it can come up with for us. Budget visualizer, well-being, recipe transformation, home organization. Okay, a lot of them are mobile apps, which makes sense, but we're not going to build an app, or not a mobile app at least. Okay, this is actually pretty interesting. I don't think this is like something people would pay for, but it's something that I think is valuable for me. I'm often thinking about this, how to go deeper into a certain topic, when I read. So I think let's just do this. This sounds good. All right. What I also use, I'm just going to show you often, is I use this tool called Super Whisper, but you don't necessarily need to do it. It's just, I think, a very nifty tool to produce better output because you give more context to tools, or to just, lay in bed with fever and just talk to your computer, which what I've done when I built the first version of my internal tool. I don't necessarily recommend it, but that's kind of what vibe coding is all about, to be honest. I think 8 looks good. Let's do that. So essentially with a keyboard shortcut, I open a transcription tool, and wherever my cursor is, once I press the same keyboard shortcut again, it transcribes my audio and then throws that into the current selected field here, basically. So I use that a lot when I work with Windsurf or Cursor, or anytime I don't feel like typing. And what's interesting is that you tend to give more context. You give more information that helps the tool create a better result. As I said, like more context, but you have to watch out not to babble on for half an hour, which is what I usually do, as you can tell probably by watching this video. So essentially, there needs to be a line that you shouldn't cross. So use it carefully. All right, so what do we have? We have a product overview, learn path, web application, that's good, problem statement. So this is essentially a PRD. I mean, I don't think there's standardization for this, but it's essentially the most important parts of what we need in order to create a good first draft. Obviously, if you have very opinionated views on stuff, you need to let the tool know, and you need to shape it however you want. You shouldn't just accept the output and be mindless. You should read it carefully and steer it into the direction that you want. Often that's also just to make it shut up and not ask any more dumb questions that are unnecessary, because you need to keep it lean, right? So assuming that we want to stay lean, we need to be in the driver's seat, right? And that isn't necessarily hard, and that's also not technical. It's more startup entrepreneur, keep it simple mindsets that are kind of, if you want to move fast, there should be implemented into your brain one way or another. All right, what do we have? Technical specifications, user journey. All right, so I think ideally we'll probably have this a questionnaire. So this, it can start as a form, but I think ideally would probably want a AI experience just to keep with the times. So there's some sort of AI chatbot, and then it collects a bunch of information, and then in the end it shits out a learning path for the user to become better in a certain area, right? Like that would be, I think, what would be ideal. Might be a bit tough to create with V0 because it often shits its pants when you want to do AI integrations and stuff. It works, but it's kind of tricky, so let's skip that for now. But that would be something I would give as feedback here. It'd be like, hey, cool, I see you're living in 2012 and everything is a form, and we're not doing AI UI, we're just doing stupid shit. No, it's not stupid, but it's just it's not going with the times essentially. And so that is where we're at, and let's roll with this for now. But yeah, if we wanted to give feedback, let's say for the user interface success metrics for the visual learning path, keep it a bit simpler, especially things. So we don't really need those things in the first MVP or whatever. And we say I want ships today in the next 20 minutes, whatever, right? One thing that might become obvious to you as we go through this is that it's drastically become so much easier to build something, which makes it even more important to dive very deep into the things that we have glanced over, which is like the market, which is your marketing, your distribution, your USP, maybe what you have as secret sauce. It's what do you know about the industry that nobody else knows? What insights do you have from a previous startup, right? So these things, they're not necessary because you have to start somewhere, but you should be not worried, but you should be aware that it makes it easier to replicate what you have, right? Which is, for example, I have products that have been copied 5 times. And where people fail is to replicate the brand that we have and to replicate functionality and the user experience in a way because they don't understand it and they just copy things around it. But that's a strategic decision that you need to make. And if you don't have any of these experiences, that's fine. You have to start somewhere, learn by building something first, but maybe be more aware that this might not be the final thing you want to work on, and it's going to be shaped in different ways. You can also partner with a domain expert, if you don't have one. So there's a million ways to do it. But again, like building a moat and building all these other things, I think they're a completely separate topic for another video. So I'm going to stop myself from ranting too much. All right, so we have learning path generator, core features, resource recommender. These are all good. I think, again, could be AI implementation. I think it's going to be what we end up with in the end, just a chatbot of sorts, but we'll keep it brief. All right. Now I said we're going to use V0. So we use Claude, V0, use whatever the fuck you want, but make sure it gives you good results. Don't skimp on the tool set because they cost $20 or whatever. It's much more costly to lose a year of your life on an idea that makes no sense or that nobody believes in except yourself. So, and I'm speaking from experience, right? So I'm very grateful for these tools, even though I am a developer, by trade, or used to be. All right, so let's see. V0, what we're going to do is just essentially tell Claude to generate a prompt for us because we have all the context here. Create a prompt for a LM tool that writes code for this idea, or let's say product. The tool is called V0. Make sure it's as detailed. Again, I have a tool for this that just essentially I switch and then the system prompt switches. So whatever goes on in the background. And then I get a tool prompt. So I get a prompt and then I just shit that into V0. But that's how you can do it yourself in Claude or whatever, ChatGPT. Okay, this is 3.7. It tends to do too much, but I like a good try hard. I also like to laugh at my own jokes, if that's not obvious. Right. So now we have something here. We have, okay, it says semantic HTML. So maybe we do need to tell it the output of the prompt will be a Next.js app. Use that. So there's V0, there's Lovable, for example. I think those are, Lovable. Those are the ones that I have tried and used. There's others that help you go one step further to actually deploy stuff, like the agent from Replit. I was like brain dead there for a second. Or bolt.dev, I think. No, bolt.new. So there's millions of these tools. I think, again, it's a matter of where are you in the stage, right? How technical are you? And how simple do you want to keep it? But I think to build a prototype to get first user feedback or to show it to a technical person to just portray your idea or communicate it, I think V0 is enough. Lovable, same. And they've been getting better as well with GitHub integrations or data storage integrations, like databases when you actually want to store add a data layer to your tool and things like that. All right, so let's try out what we get out of this. We have a prompt. We have a lot of information. I know it's probably mostly going to ignore it anyway. So let's just copy this in here. Again, if you need to shape this, you always need to try, right? Like you can iterate on this prompt for 20 minutes or half an hour in your head or in Claude, but it doesn't matter. Just throw it in here, see what happens, and then we will see where we need to make decisions or where we need to make changes in order to push it where we need it to be. But what we understand isn't necessarily what the tool will understand, no matter if it makes total sense for us. So we always need to just iterate on it. is most likely, or like as close to the source of where it's going to end up as possible, which now here is V0 because we're going to deploy a prototype of sorts, right? One thing with V0, I'm not sure about Lovable, but if you iterate a lot, it can be quite slow. So it rewrites the whole file every time you want to make changes. I think they did that because it's easier, honestly, but it also takes more time. And so once you reach a certain stage and you want to do smaller, more refined changes, I would recommend something like Cursor or Windsurf. I use Windsurf. I think they're both similar. I think Windsurf launches a thing and then Cursor copies it and vice versa. I use Windsurf because I didn't like Cursor in the beginning, long time ago, and I found Windsurf to be nicer, more aligned with how I think and the flows that they have. And so I adapted it, and now it's basically shiny object syndrome. So yeah, Cursor might launch something that's 5% better, but then Windsurf launched the same thing. And so do you really want to spend this much time learning this other thing? Because Cursor is a little bit different. You have more control, but you also need to be more surgical with how you inject context. And so these are all trade-offs you have to think about. So as a non-technical, I would say Windsurf. But yeah, so that's then the next step. So here you can make smaller changes. Make sure you have source control as well. So GitHub, set that up. I think that's possible within, so you can connect this to GitHub. Because then if AI fucks up something, you can make sure you can restore it, right? So I've seen people lose a lot of progress just because they haven't actually saved their progress somewhere, which means that you start from scratch, right? Which you don't want. But these are all things that technical people already know because we kind of learned that very early on, that it's dangerous to not do it. And so, yeah, I think there's a bit of a learning curve, so there must be some friction in order to get rewards, but you can also do it without and you can suffer the consequences. But again, let's just say, what do I need to look out for when creating this prototype? Let's see, maybe it will have GitHub here on the list. Okay, most of this already built into V0, so it uses some certain library and it uses essentially template code. Pre-written content, real links. Okay. What about risking data loss? So I guess it doesn't think about GitHub right away. Let's see. Yeah, so here now it says, okay, to prevent data loss, let's do Git. And then for each of these steps, if you think they are necessary, use your judgment. You can essentially, again, go down the rabbit hole with Claude and figure out how to do it. So there's really no excuses. And now we have our first prototype. Let's see, I want to do finance and I'm a beginner. All right, here we have a learning path now. Understanding the fundamentals of finance, practice basic skills. Okay, so what if we are intermediate? All right, advanced finance concepts, finance best practices. So these links also work, which is essentially already kind of pretty good, right? Let's see, cooking. Okay, so not all of them. But yeah, I mean, this is the, I guess, AI integration part, right? I think most of the stuff will be hard-coded and from Claude. So probably what we would want is maybe Perplexity or some other tool that gives us real links and kind of scrapes the internet for it, right? And so these things are, I think, next steps that you can take. Or you can completely change the UI, right? You can say, let's add an expert level. So if we think that experts are the most likely users of our tool to really go down a rabbit hole and they need help, which is, I don't know, it's not very likely, right? So again, use some common sense. And we can iterate here on top of what we already had. So the PRD, I think, is really just the first step, but we can obviously feed back what we learn here. So let's say we create this with the PRD and it's missing the expert level. Let's say we learn something new here and then we feed that back into Claude and say, hey, I've learned that I also think that experts are, the ones that benefit the most from this, right? Or we can use Claude as a brainstorm machine and say, which of my user types, beginners, intermediate, or expert, will benefit the most from this. So then we can use this as a brainstorm partner and get feedback. Who should we focus on, right? So that's how I usually mostly use AI, is kind of as a crutch to help me think better and think through blind spots that I am not aware of. Gap filling. Yeah, so beginners benefit the most, which I think is quite obvious, but this is just an example. And what it's important is learning how to think about AI and using AI tools to solve problems. That's really what we're doing, right? And this is just a concrete example that maybe isn't super sensical right now, but I think you get the idea, right? What we can also do, which I found very interesting, is to say, simulate 10 people that are potential beginner users of my tool, and make them give feedback on the tool, the pros and cons, and synthesize response with the combined viewpoints, whatever. Again, I have a tool for this that does this, but for the sake of the exercise, let's do it here. And then, people don't like talking to people. Whenever you ask someone if they've already gotten validation or getting feedback for their idea, they will tell you no. Or essentially what they've done is they've went to someone and they asked, like, here's my thing, do you think it's cool? And the people say, like, yeah, it's cool, but they never get any real feedback. This isn't feedback. This is essentially just getting your bias, confirmed. Brutally, we can add this because we know. So it's almost better to ask AI for feedback than it is to ask real people if you don't know how to do a user interview. This will save you a lot of pain, and obviously the market in the end will decide. So you need to, at some point, ask people. But again, if you're not experienced with this and you haven't read the mom test, for example, and you haven't taken up what the mom test has to offer, which is harder than reading it because it's only 80 pages or something, but it's a great book. It seems nonsensical because this isn't real people, but it's going to give you like an average opinion, and AI doesn't have emotion, so it doesn't care what you think. And so it's better than a person, because a person is going to be, this is the best thing I've ever seen, but I'll never in a million years use it or pay for it. These are different friction levels that you won't get over. And let's see what they have for us, right? At least I didn't need a trial maker. All right, so I guess nobody's impressed. Okay, so it's too simple, right? We have simplicity, but we don't have substance. Maybe it took the roasting a bit too literally because this is too negative. I don't know. Let's make it honest feedback. Right, so essentially it's beginners, no niche interests, community aspect, learning with others. So gives us ideas for the future. We need to discount those for the amount of effort we're willing to put into the tool for now, right? So we shouldn't just say like, oh yeah, they told me to build all these things, but we need to be critical of investment and time, and we shouldn't make this an excuse to not ship anything for another 2 years, but we should think about what that means and potentially where that could go and how that aligns with our vision of the product, right? Let's see if it added what we asked for. All right, so now we also have an expert level. Again, not super helpful, but this is how you can improve the tool in here. Then go back, put the improvements into the PRD, integrate a database, and I'll start saving things or integrating with Supabase. Again, all topics for some other time, but we can now deploy this, and that will give us a publicly accessible link for someone to play around with. And then once we have, even if that playing around is just for us, this will give us new ideas. This will give us a foot on the ground, which is always the hardest part, to take the first step, and we can take it from here. But we also are not super emotionally invested in this because it literally took us like half an hour, and most of it's just me going on rants, right? So this is another thing where for me personally, the first time I built a startup, I was really struggling to get something out because I was really worried about what other people would think, right? And I was also really worried that it wasn't perfect. And these are common struggles. And I worked on it for way too long. And mostly the reason was because I already worked on it for a year, what are 2 months more to get it to a place where it's perfect, quote unquote. But then that place, 2 months are over, it's still not perfect because it will never be. And this is just like reality and how it works. And I think that by reducing the friction to get something out there and start learning, this will set you on a path for learning what you need to learn, which is that the market usually doesn't give a shit about what you want, and you need to fight your way, to a product that is valuable, and not just for you, but also for others. And, at least you've made the first step. And if this turns into something else, that's 99% of cases, so be it. All right. I hope this was somewhat interesting. I know I sometimes go on rants too much, but if you want more rants, feel free to subscribe below, and I'll see you next time. And also, if you want to know something specific about the process, about how to solve certain steps, let me know, and I'm happy to make another video and go on another rant. Alrighty, that's it. Cheers.